The notary slid the final page across the table and handed me a pen. My hand didn't shake. After everything I had pushed through to get to that moment, I was not going to let my hand shake. I signed my name, set the pen down, and the escrow officer smiled at me like she had seen 1,000 closings, but somehow still meant it. Congratulations, the condo is yours. I sat there for a second longer than I probably should have. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I wanted to memorize exactly how that moment felt before the world found a way to complicate it. And I knew it would. I just didn't know how fast. I am 31 years old, and I've been working night shifts in the ICU since I was 24. Not because I had no other options, because I wanted to pay off my loans fast, build a savings account that actually meant something, and get myself to a place where I didn't have to ask anyone for anything. That goal kept me awake through 12-hour shifts when my feet felt like concrete and the fluorescent lights were eating what was left of my brain. That goal kept me from splurging on vacations or a new car or the things my coworkers talked about over bad break-room coffee. I lived in a studio apartment for 5 years. I brought lunch from home every single day. I drove a Honda with 200,000 miles on it, and I told myself every time it rattled at a stoplight that the rattle was worth it. Nobody in my family thought I was serious. My brother Marcus had been telling me for 3 years that the housing market was impossible, that I should just keep renting, that buying a place alone as a single woman with a nursing salary was basically a fantasy. His wife Renee said it more gently but meant it the same way. You're so young. There's no rush. Why stress yourself out? What they really meant was that it didn't fit their picture of how things should go. In their version, I would keep living small, keep being available, keep showing up when they needed a babysitter or a loan or someone to watch their dog for a week while they went to Myrtle Beach. I didn't tell them when I started seriously looking. I didn't tell them when I made an offer. I told my coworker Dana and my friend Priya from college, and I made them both swear silence. Not because I was ashamed, because I had watched what happened when Marcus got wind of something good in my life. He had a way of wrapping concern around his self-interest so tightly that by the end of a conversation, you couldn't tell where one stopped and the other started. The condo was on the 4th floor of a building in a quiet part of the city. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen with actual counter space, and a balcony that faced east so the morning light came in soft and even. To someone else it might have looked like a perfectly ordinary apartment. To me it looked like proof. Proof that 7 years of night shifts and meal prep and saying no to things I wanted added up to something real and solid and mine. I moved in on a Saturday in early October. Dana helped me carry boxes. We ate pizza on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, just a sleeping bag and a lamp I'd had since college. We laughed about something stupid and I fell asleep that night listening to the building settle around me. No neighbors stomping upstairs. No landlord who took 3 weeks to fix a leaking faucet. No lease renewal hanging over my next year like a question mark. I gave myself 2 weeks before telling my family. I wanted to get settled first. Get the feel of the place. Make it mine before anyone else had opinions about it. The problem was that I made one mistake. A small one. The kind that feels harmless until it isn't. About 10 days after I moved in, my brother called and asked if he could come by to drop off a housewarming gift. I said yes before I thought it through. I was tired from a double shift and I was proud of the place, and I wanted at least one moment of my family being happy for me. He came over with Renee and their 2 kids, Jalen, who is 8, and Brianna, who is 5. They walked through the condo and Marcus made all the right sounds. The kitchen is nice, good natural light. Smart investment, sis. Renee held Brianna on her hip and walked slowly through the 2nd bedroom. She stood in the doorway a moment longer than felt casual. It's such a good size, she said. Enough room for a bed and a dresser and still have space to play. I knew what she was doing. I filed it away. Before they left, Marcus asked if he could hold onto a spare key. Just in case, he said. If there's ever an emergency and you're at work, someone needs to be able to get in. You don't want a leaking pipe to flood your place because nobody could get inside. It sounded reasonable in the moment. I had heard too many hospital stories about people losing everything to a burst pipe or a fire because there was no backup plan. I said fine, handed him the key from the spare set I had made at the hardware store, and thought nothing more of it. I should have thought more of it. The next few weeks were normal. I worked my shifts, bought a couch, got a bed frame delivered, Started making the place feel like somewhere I actually lived and not just stored myself overnight. I had a few coworkers over for dinner. I sat on my balcony in the mornings with coffee and watched the city do its quiet early routine. I felt like myself in a way I hadn't in years. Then my brother called on a Tuesday evening and said something that put a cold feeling in my chest. "So listen," he started, which is always how he begins sentences that are not actually questions. "Our lease is up in January, and the landlord is raising the rent again. We've been thinking about our options and honestly, Mel, your second bedroom is just sitting empty." I let the silence stretch out. He filled it. "It would only be temporary. 3 months, maybe 4, while we figure something out. The kids would share the room, they're fine with that. And Renee and I would help with utilities. You'd barely notice us." I said I would think about it. I did not think about it. I knew the answer immediately. But saying no to Marcus required preparation. He did not accept no as a complete sentence. He treated it as an opening position. I called him back 2 days later and told him it wasn't going to work. My space, my schedule, my peace. He made the sounds of understanding and then hung up before I could say anything else. Renee texted me an hour later. "Just so you know, the kids were really excited about it. Brianna keeps asking about the balcony." I did not respond to that text. What I did do, the moment I had a day off, was go to the hardware store and have a new lock cylinder installed on my front door. Not because I was certain Marcus would do something, because I had learned somewhere between year 1 and year 7 of nursing that you prepare for the risk before the incident, not after. I texted my brother to let him know the lock had been updated for security reasons and that I would give him a new key once the situation felt stable. He replied with a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. That thumbs up made me uneasy in a way I couldn't name right away. November passed. I worked Thanksgiving because the pay differential was worth it and because the holiday had always felt complicated in my family anyway. Marcus sent a group text with a photo of the table. Everyone looked fine. I sent back a heart and went back to my shift. In December, I got assigned to a 6-day conference in Phoenix. Continuing education, one of the requirements for renewing my certification. I arranged for Dana to water my one plant and check the mail, and I set my security app to alert me if the front door sensor triggered. The building had its own cameras in the hallways and lobby, but I had also installed a small interior camera on the bookshelf in the living room when I first moved in, the kind that looks like a decorative piece and connects to my phone. Old habit from living in buildings where management was slow to respond to anything. The first 4 days in Phoenix were uneventful. I sat in conference rooms and absorbed information about updated protocols and took notes I would probably never reference again. I called Priya on day 3. I ate at a restaurant by myself and ordered the expensive pasta and did not feel guilty about it. Day 5. I was in the hotel lobby waiting for a shuttle back from a dinner when my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Living room camera. I almost dismissed it. It could have been light shifting. Dana with a key to the mailbox, not the unit. A glitch. Then the notification showed movement again. And again. I opened the app. The living room was lit up. My lamp was on, the one in the corner I used for reading. Someone had pulled my throw blanket off the couch and left it bunched on the floor. A jacket I did not recognize was draped over the arm of my couch. Through the wide-angle lens, I could make out 2 small figures running across the living room floor. Jalen and Brianna. My throat went tight. I moved through the lobby, phone in hand, and stood near the window where the signal was stronger. I switched to the wide view and waited. Renee walked into frame, carrying a laundry basket. She set it on my coffee table, opened the basket, and started folding clothes on my couch. My couch. Like she was in her own living room. I heard myself exhale, slow and controlled. The way I do before a hard conversation at work when I have to tell someone something they don't want to hear and I cannot afford to fall apart. I kept watching. Marcus came into view, phone to his ear, pacing in front of my balcony door. He had his shoes on. On my floors. I stood in that hotel lobby and counted to 10. Then I opened my contacts. I did not call Marcus. I had learned from watching that video of him walk through my home like a hotel guest that calling him would give him the chance to explain before I had all the information. I called the non-emergency line for the city's police department instead, gave them my address, told them I was out of town, that my camera showed unauthorized occupants in my unit and that I had not given anyone permission to be there. The dispatcher was calm and professional. She asked if I wanted to file a report or request a welfare check. I said I wanted to file a report of unauthorized entry and request that officers make contact with the individuals inside. She took my information and told me an officer would respond and follow up with me by phone. I hung up and went back to the camera feed. The kids were eating something at my kitchen table. Renee had moved to what looked like the second bedroom. I watched her pull open the closet door and look inside, and something in my chest went very still. My phone rang 40 minutes later, officer calling with a reference number and an update. 2 adults and 2 minor children had been found inside the unit. The male subject stated he was the homeowner's brother and that he had been given permission. The female subject produced a key that fit the door. I told the officer clearly. I changed my locks in November. I did not provide him with a new key. Whatever key he used, it was not authorized by me. I never gave them permission to be in my home. There was a brief pause. The officer asked if I wanted to pursue trespassing charges. I said yes. Marcus called me 47 seconds after I hung up. I did not answer. I sent him a text that said one sentence. I will speak with you when I get home in 2 days. Do not go back to my unit. He called 6 more times that night. Renee sent a long text that I read once and archived without responding to. It started with "we didn't think it was a big deal" and ended with "you're acting like we're strangers." I lay in the hotel bed with the room dark and the air conditioning too cold, and I thought about every conversation I had ever had with Marcus where I ended up apologizing for something that was not my fault. Every time he called me difficult. Every time Renee said I was too rigid. Every time the family sort of collectively nodded in his direction and waited for me to bend. I thought about the spare key I had given him months ago, before the lock change, the one I had retrieved and replaced. And then I thought about the key the officer mentioned, the one that opened the new lock. That was the part that kept me awake. When I got home, the unit had been left relatively tidy. Someone had washed the dishes. The blanket was back on the couch, but there were small signs everywhere if you knew how to read them. A slightly different arrangement of things on my kitchen counter. A towel in the bathroom that was not mine. A smudge on the balcony door at child height. They had tried to erase themselves, which told me they had known the whole time that what they were doing was wrong. I called the locksmith before I even unpacked. This time I got a smart lock with a rotating code that I could change remotely and that kept a log of every entry. I had the installer explain every feature twice and I wrote nothing down where anyone could find it. Then I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and waited. Marcus came by the next evening. He knocked instead of letting himself in, which I took as acknowledgement that he understood the current terms. I opened the door and looked at him without saying anything. He started with the version of the story where he was reasonable. The lease situation was real. They were in a tight spot. It was only supposed to be a couple of days. The kids needed stability. He didn't think I would mind because it was family. I let him finish. Then I asked him one question. How did you get into my unit after I changed the locks? He looked at the floor for a second too long, said he had found a locksmith who could rekey a spare, and that he still had the mold from the original key he had made before I changed them. He said it like it was a technicality rather than a deliberate act. Like duplicating a key without permission was something that required a shrug and a footnote, not a real conversation. I felt something solidify in me. Not anger. Something cleaner than that. Clarity. I told him what I had already set in motion. The police report. The trespassing documentation. The security log from the smart lock that showed entry timestamps I did not authorize. His face shifted through several expressions before landing on the one he always used when he was trapped. The wounded one. The "you're really going to do this to me" look. I'm your sister, I said. Not your contingency plan. He tried the Brianna angle next. You realize how this affects the kids. Brianna talks about your place like it's a special house. She thinks of you as someone she can count on. I told him that Brianna was 5 years old, and that whatever she thought about my condo was something Marcus and Renee had put into her head, and that using your 5-year-old daughter's feelings as a negotiating tool said more about the situation than anything else. He left without saying goodbye. Renee sent nothing that night, which felt like its own kind of statement. The fallout moved through the family the way these things always do. in waves and at angles, through aunts and cousins, and my mother who called me the following Sunday with a voice that was trying very hard to sound neutral. She said she understood both sides. She said Marcus was going through a hard time. She said I knew how he could be, but that didn't mean I had to involve the police. I asked her if she had ever once called Marcus to say that she understood my side. She didn't answer right away. I told her I loved her and that I would talk to her when things were calmer, and I ended the call. My cousin Deja texted, "Are you seriously pressing charges on your own brother?" "He has kids," I wrote back. "He has kids and I have a mortgage. Those things can both be true." She did not respond. At work, I told Dana the whole thing over lunch because Dana was one of the two people who had known from the beginning and she had earned the full story. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I trusted her. When I finished, she said, "The audacity of using the word temporary after making a copy of your key. It helped. Hearing it out loud like that. Hearing someone say yes. That was a real violation, and no, you were not overreacting." The days got quieter. Marcus's calls came less frequently. Renee stopped texting entirely. The family group chat had a noticeable absence of my name coming up in any warm context, which told me the consensus was that I had been difficult and should eventually apologize and let things go back to normal. I had no intention of doing that. What I did do was take 2 days off that I had been sitting on for months and spend them doing nothing particularly meaningful. I made a slow breakfast both mornings. I sat on my balcony with coffee and watched the city. I took a long walk on a Saturday afternoon and stopped at a bookstore and bought 3 books I didn't need. I called Priya and we talked for almost 2 hours about nothing urgent. I cleaned my apartment at my own pace, moving through each room without hurrying, without checking on anything except what was directly in front of me. On the second evening, I stood in my kitchen making dinner, and I realized I had not thought about Marcus once all day. Not with anger, not with guilt, not with the low-grade dread that used to follow me through family conversations like background noise. I thought about the years I had spent making myself smaller so he could feel like enough. The loans I had quietly covered and never brought up again. The holidays I had shown up for even when showing up cost me sleep I couldn't replace. The way I had let his version of my ambitions become the operating belief in the room, that I was too focused, too rigid, too unwilling to share what I built. I thought about the night I signed those closing papers and how I had sat there for a second longer than necessary, memorizing the feeling. I had known something was going to try to complicate it. I had just assumed the complication would come from outside. It had come from the closest possible direction instead, which was harder in some ways and clarifying in others. The trespassing process moved forward. Marcus hired a lawyer who sent a letter suggesting the matter could be resolved without further legal action if I agreed to drop the filing and accept a written apology. I read the letter, forwarded it to the attorney I had consulted briefly, and declined. The written apology never came from Marcus himself, just from the attorney. I did not accept it. Not out of cruelty. Out of accuracy. An apology written by someone else after legal pressure is not actually an apology. It is a document designed to close a file, and I was not interested in closing files I had not yet finished reading. My mother called again in January. This time, without the pretense of neutrality. She said she was hurt that things had gotten so far. She said the family felt fractured. She said she didn't know who I had become. I told her I was the same person I had always been. The one who worked night shifts for 7 years and brought my lunch every day and drove a rattling car because I had a plan I was sticking to. The same one who showed up when it mattered and said yes when I could and tried to love people who sometimes made that very hard. I had not changed. I had just stopped pretending that silence meant I was fine with everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I just want us to be okay." I told her we could be, but okay had to mean something real. It couldn't mean I absorbed whatever Marcus decided to take and called that love. She said she would think about that. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in months. Spring came in slow. I put a small plant on the balcony railing. I learned that the woman 2 doors down, whose name was Constance, grew herbs in window boxes and sometimes left small bundles outside her door for neighbors to take. I took a bundle of thyme once and left a note that said thank you. She knocked on my door the following week to introduce herself properly, and we talked for 20 minutes about neighborhood things. Nothing heavy or complicated. It was exactly the kind of interaction I had been too depleted to have for years. Work was still work. The ICU does not soften, and it does not accommodate your personal life, and I had made peace with that a long time ago. But something had shifted in how I moved through it. I had less weight on me that wasn't mine. That made the weight that was mine more manageable. Dana said I seemed lighter. I told her she was probably right. The charges against Marcus were ultimately resolved through a civil agreement that involved him paying a modest fine and signing a document acknowledging unauthorized entry. No criminal record. My attorney said it was a reasonable outcome given the circumstances. Marcus's lawyer called it a resolution. Marcus himself sent me a text 3 weeks later that said, "Hope you're doing okay." No acknowledgement of anything specific. Just those 4 words into a long silence. I read it and put my phone down and went back to what I had been doing. I don't know what my brother thought was going to happen. Whether he imagined I would eventually call him and cry and say, "Let's fix this," and go back to the pattern we had always had. Maybe he did. People who have been accommodated their whole lives often confuse the accommodation for something permanent. What I know is this. My condo is mine. Every square foot of it was purchased with money I earned in rooms with fluorescent lighting at 3 in the morning, while other people were home in their beds. Every cabinet and counter and square of east-facing balcony was paid for by choices I made over years that nobody in my family gave me credit for because they were too quiet to make a good story. I have a smart lock now with an entry log that I check the way some people check social media. Out of habit more than fear, though the habit was born from fear, and I am honest enough to say that. I have a neighbor named Constance who leaves herbs outside her door and who waves at me in the hallway with no agenda. I have a coworker named Dana who sat on my floor and ate pizza with me the night I moved in, and who is still the first person I call when something matters. I had a brother who thought family was a key that opened every lock. I changed the locks. Some people in my family are still waiting for me to soften enough to let things go back to what they were. I understand the impulse. The old shape of things was comfortable for everyone except me. But comfortable is not the same as right, and I spent enough years confusing the two. I stand on my balcony in the mornings now with coffee and watch the street below get its day started. Cars pulling out, someone walking a dog, the light coming over the building to the east in that particular way it does in early spring, cutting sideways and low and making everything look a little sharper than it did a minute ago. I am 31 years old. I own a home. I got here by myself. Nobody who tried to take that from me gets to claim any part of what it means now. I signed those papers on a quiet afternoon in October, and the escrow officer smiled at me and said, "Congratulations." I sat there a second longer than I needed to because I wanted to remember exactly how that felt before the world had a chance to touch it. It touched it anyway. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The world always finds the gap, but what I know now that I did not know then is that the world finding the gap and the world getting through are 2 different things. My door is locked. The code is mine. The light on this balcony in the morning belongs to no one else. I finally stopped waiting for my family to celebrate what I built. I built it anyway. And that turns out to be the better ending.